Canada used to have jobs so strange, most people today have never heard of them, yet these were real careers that kept towns alive through harsh winters and long workdays. Let's look back at 21 Canadian jobs that once filled everyday life but have disappeared completely. Before sunrise, when frost clung to windows and porches creaked in the cold, the milkman was already at work. For decades, his footsteps and the clink of glass bottles were the first sounds of the morning in many neighborhoods. Families left empty bottles on their steps, sometimes with coins tucked under the lip or a handwritten note asking for an extra quart. Milkmen walked their routes through drifting snow and icy sidewalks, carrying heavy wire crates that left deep marks on their gloves. They knew every house by heart and often noticed when something seemed wrong, especially with older residents. Many stayed on the same streets for years. As supermarkets grew and fridges became common, their deliveries shrank until only a few routes were left. But the sound of bottles at dawn still lives in many Canadians' memories. If the milkman brought comfort, the Blizzard mail carrier brought grit. Mail had to move no matter what the weather looked like, and in Canada that meant pushing through storms that could turn whole towns white. Postal workers hauled canvas bags that grew heavier as snow soaked through the fabric. Some strapped on snowshoes, while others led small horses along rural roads. They learned to follow fence posts, lone trees, and familiar barns when the wind made it impossible to see ahead. People depended on them for checks, news from family, and important letters. Even when the town shut down, the carrier kept going, step by slow step, until the last house was reached. Streetcar conductors brought a steadier routine to the cities. Before modern transit systems, their voices echoed through cars in Toronto, Montreal, Winnipeg, and Vancouver. They wore sharp uniforms, carried heavy ticket punches, and walked the aisle while the streetcar rattled over metal tracks. They helped school children climb down safely, held bags for elderly riders, and reminded rowdy teenagers to behave. Every signal mattered. One ring on the bell meant stop, 2 rings meant go. A wrong signal could bring the whole line to a halt. Riders still remember the warm smell of the car, the sparks from overhead wires, and the conductor's calm voice calling out each stop. Switchboard operators at Bell Telephone connected an even bigger world. Long before automated dialing, these women were the heart of Canada's communication system. When someone picked up the phone, an operator answered with a steady voice ready to connect one household to another. In front of them sat a large wooden board filled with cords, lights, and numbered sockets. They memorized hundreds of numbers, recognized regular callers, and kept perfect etiquette even with impatient voices on the line. Many worked late-night shifts with only the soft glow of the switchboard to keep them awake. As machines replaced manual exchanges in the 1,960 seconds and 70 seconds, the operators slowly disappeared, leaving behind a job that required quick hands, sharp minds, and absolute discretion. While operators worked indoors, paperboys faced the outdoors head-on. For decades, Canadian mornings began with the sound of bicycles rolling across wet pavement or crunching through snow. Paperboys and papergirls woke before school, picked up heavy bundles of newspapers from the corner shop, folded them tight, and pedaled through neighborhoods with bags so full they leaned to one side. Sunday deliveries were the toughest. Thick news sections made each paper feel like a brick. These young workers learned every front step, every barking dog, and every icy driveway on their route. The pay was small, but the sense of responsibility and those Christmas tips made it worth it. For many Canadians, their first job was not in a store or office. It was on a bike, riding through the cold, delivering the day's news before most people were awake. Elevator operators added a different kind of charm to daily life. In Eaton's Hudson's Bay, Montreal's grand hotels, and office towers across the country. Stepping into an elevator meant stepping into a small moving room guided by a uniformed operator. They wore neat suits or dresses and stood beside a metal lever that controlled the lift's speed. Early, elevators didn't line up with the floor automatically. Operators had to stop the cabin at the perfect level so no one tripped. They announced each floor with a warm, practiced voice and often learned regular riders by name. For nervous customers, the operator's steady presence made the ride feel safe. As technology advanced, automatic buttons replaced the lever, and the job faded quietly from Canadian cities. Knife and razor sharpeners brought a different kind of energy to neighborhoods. Families didn't throw away dull knives. They waited for the sharpener to arrive. Some pushed small carts. Others rode bicycles with sharpening wheels attached to the back. You could hear the grinding stone from half a block away. People handed over kitchen knives, scissors, and even gardening tools. Sparks flicked off the wheel as neighbors gathered to chat, and kids watched with wide eyes. It was simple work, but it kept households running. As cheap replacements became common in stores, the sharpening carts showed up less often until eventually they were gone. Ice cream vans created memories of their own. And before electronic jingles, some vans had a dedicated chimes operator. This person sat beside the driver, ringing tuned bells or cranking a mechanical music box to let kids know the van was close. The timing had to be perfect. Too early and no one heard it. Too late and the kids missed their chance. On hot days, the van transformed the street. Children came running with coins in their hands, lined up in excitement, and waited for the little window to slide open. When the rush grew, the chimes operator switched from bells to passing out cones and popsicles. As pre-recorded tunes became standard in the 1,970 seconds, the need for a chimes operator disappeared, but the memories stayed. Fire lookout watchers had one of the toughest jobs in old Canada. These workers lived alone in tall wooden towers deep in the forest, spending long days scanning the horizon for the smallest trace of smoke. They woke with the sunrise, climbed narrow stairs, and sat in tiny rooms where the wind slipped through the cracks. A single mist wisp could mean a wildfire spreading toward nearby towns. Supplies arrived by truck or helicopter, and storms shook the tower so hard that mugs rattled on the shelves. The silence was heavy, but the job protected entire communities. Down below, timber cruisers pushed through thick brush to measure the forests long before any tree was cut. They carried axes, tape measures, and notebooks while hiking through uneven ground that soaked boots and scraped legs. Their job was to judge wood quality, map the land, and estimate how much a forest could produce. They set up simple camps, cooked over small fires, and fell asleep to the sound of wind moving through the trees. A timber cruiser needed sharp eyes and steady steps because weather changed fast, and wildlife often wandered close. When new tools arrived, their long journeys through untouched forests slowly came to an end. On the rivers, danger came from below. Log drivers balanced on spinning logs as they floated down rushing water during spring thaw. The current was strong. The logs rolled constantly, and cold spray hit their faces with every step. Drivers used metal-tipped poles to break apart jams and keep the logs moving. Crowds sometimes gathered on bridges to watch them run across the shifting piles, making the job look like a daring sport. One wrong step could drag a man under the timber, yet they returned day after day. When trucks and machines replaced river drives, the river pigs disappeared from Canada's waterways. Before refrigerators became common, ice cutters worked through winter on frozen lakes. They marked straight lines, cut deep into the thick ice, and pulled out heavy blocks using long hooks. horses or early trucks hauled the ice to straw-lined ice houses where it stayed frozen until summer. The work was freezing, wet, and often dangerous. Water splashed up through cracks. Wind raced across the open lake. Gloves stiffened with frost. But families, restaurants, and shops relied on these workers to keep food cold. Once electric fridges arrived, the ice harvest ended almost overnight. Out on the prairies, another job shaped early life. Sod house builders helped families create homes from the land when lumber was too expensive or too far away. Workers cut long strips of earth with thick roots still attached and stacked them like bricks. Sod houses stayed warm in winter and cool in summer, though they also had quirks. Walls shed bits of dirt. Insects crept in. After rain, the house smelled like damp soil. Still, these homes sheltered thousands of families, and the builders who raised them made early prairie life possible. As towns grew and sawmills spread, sod houses slowly vanished. In growing towns, honey wagon collectors handled a job most people today can hardly imagine. Before indoor plumbing, many homes used backyard outhouses. When the pits filled up, collectors arrived at dawn or late at night with buckets and tools to empty them. The work smelled awful but kept neighborhoods healthy. They moved quickly, covered their faces with scarves, and left before most people woke up. As sewer lines reached more homes, the honey wagons faded away, becoming a part of history no one wanted to revisit too closely. Far from the towns, voyageurs kept travel alive in remote regions. Long after the fur trade era, some communities still relied on skilled paddlers to move mail, supplies, and goods across lakes and rivers where no roads existed. Voyageurs carried heavy canoes over rocky portages, paddled through strong currents, and slept outdoors under the stars. Calm mornings could turn stormy without warning. Rapids appeared suddenly around bends. These workers connected places no other transport could reach. When roads and railways expanded, the voyages grew rare, but the old routes remained part of Canada's story. Deep underground, nickel miners depended on the careful hands of cage tenders. These workers operated the lifts that carried miners into Sudbury's deep shafts. The cage dropped fast into darkness, brushing against wooden guides as it descended. Tender controlled the speed, watched the signals, and stopped at the exact level miners stood waiting. A small mistake could cause injuries. Tenders learned every sound the cage made and could tell when something didn't feel right. Years later, automated lift controls replaced them, but the stories of the old cages remain part of mining life. Across the country, CPR telegraph linemen kept communication lines alive. They climbed tall poles during ice storms, snowfalls, and summer heat, carrying belts filled with tools for repairing broken wires. The wind made the wires hum, and storms coated everything in ice. They walked miles along the tracks, checking the lines and making quick repairs before messages backed up. A single broken wire could throw off train schedules or cut whole regions off from important news. When new communication systems arrived, many of the old telegraph routes were abandoned. Inside the trains themselves, railway mail sorters worked in narrow cars filled with shelves. As the train moved between stations, workers sorted letters by hand, sliding envelopes into the correct slots while the car rocked side to side. Bags of mail were thrown in at one station and had to be sorted before the next one arrived. At night, lanterns filled the car with a soft glow while steel wheels rumbled beneath their feet. When sorting centers and automation took over, the rolling post office disappeared, ending a job that once kept Canada's mail moving at full speed. Lighthouse keepers carried one of the quietest but most important jobs in old Canada. Before automated lights took over, keepers lived right beside the sea, watching over lamps that guided ships through fog, storms, and winter nights. Their mornings began with trimming the wick until it burned clean and bright. They refilled oil tanks, polished metal parts, and wiped salt spray from the glass so the beams stayed clear. When storms rolled in, wind pounded the tower and waves crashed so hard the floors shook. Some stations were so remote that supplies came only a few times to a year. For many families, the lighthouse wasn't just a workplace, it was home. When electric bulbs and automated timers replaced the old lamps, the keepers slowly disappeared, leaving behind tall towers that once kept sailors safe on the darkest nights. Far from the coast, a different job kept. Busy buildings running smoothly. Vacuum tube clerks worked inside department stores, banks, and government offices before email existed. These buildings used long pneumatic tubes hidden in ceilings and walls. A clerk placed a note or receipt inside a small metal capsule and sent it shooting through the tube with a loud whoosh. Moments later, it arrived in another part of the building. Stores like Eaton's and Simpson's used the system for payroll, returns, and customer orders. Clerks listened for the thump of arriving capsules, flipped them open, sorted the papers, and sent replies, racing back through the tubes. It felt fast and high-tech for its time. When computers replaced paper messages, the tube system fell silent, and the clerks moved on. Another memory lives in the old Christmas windows of Canada's largest department stores. Christmas window decorators created displays that stopped families in their tracks. Behind tall glass panels, they arranged tiny winter scenes with glowing lights, moving figures, and sparkling snow. They tested motors, adjusted props by hand, and made sure every little character moved at the right speed. Children pressed their faces against the cold glass while parents pointed out their favorite scenes. For many families, visiting the downtown windows in Toronto or Montreal became a holiday tradition. When budgets tightened and stores changed focus, the grand displays became simpler, and the decorators who built the magic disappeared quietly. Closer to the ground, street sweepers kept city streets clean long before large machines took over. These workers pushed heavy brooms and metal scoops along curbs, clearing away leaves, paper, and whatever the day left behind. They chipped ice from drains in winter so melting snow wouldn't flood the streets. Whether it was hot sun or cold wind, they walked their routes for hours, keeping the city tidy. As sweeping trucks became common, the old hand sweepers faded from sight, but their slow, steady work once shaped daily life in growing towns. On farms across the prairies, threshing crews brought their own kind of excitement. Before modern harvest equipment, workers moved from farm to farm with large threshing machines that separated grain from stalks. Days were long, dusty, and loud. Golden straw piled high beside the machines, and steam drifted through the air. Farmers prepared huge meals for the crews, setting long tables filled with potatoes, meats, fresh bread, and pies. Children watched from porches, amazed by the size and noise of the machine. When smaller and easier equipment became available, the traveling threshing crews slowly disappeared. Near rivers and lakes, fish hatchery workers spent their days caring for thousands of young salmon and trout before they were released into the wild. These workers fed the fish, cleaned the tanks, and checked water conditions to keep the young fish healthy. The job demanded patience because the tiny fish were sensitive to temperature and movement. Many of the release programs helped rebuild fish populations across Canada. As hatchery systems became more advanced, the quiet, hands-on methods changed, but early workers played an important role in shaping the future of Canada's waters. Farther north or along mountain trails, packhorse mail carriers handled routes that no early vehicle could reach. These workers loaded mail bags onto horses and followed narrow paths through thick forests, rocky slopes, and deep valleys. Weather changed fast. Snow-covered trails, rivers, rose without warning. But the carriers made their way to remote homesteads and small settlements that depended on their deliveries. When roads and trucks finally reached these regions, the packhorse routes shut down one by one. Back in older cities, lamplighters brought a comforting glow to the streets before electric lighting spread. Every evening, they walked long routes carrying tall poles with small flames at the tip. They opened the lamp doors, lit the wicks, and adjusted the brightness so the flame burned steady. At dawn, they returned to snuff each light by hand. Rain, fog, and snow made the job tricky, but neighborhoods trusted the warm light. When electrical systems replaced gas lamps, the lamplighters' quiet work faded into memory. Inside small workshops, button press operators worked on clothing that filled Canadian stores. These workers used hand-operated machines to attach buttons to coats, uniforms, and everyday outfits. Each press made a sharp clack that echoed around the room. Operators moved quickly, careful not to catch their fingers under the machine. Row after row of garments passed through their hands. When new machines took over much of the work, button pressing became a job few people remembered. In busy urban centers, bicycle couriers delivered letters and small parcels long before electronic signatures and tracked shipping existed. They weaved through traffic, pedaled up steep hills, and squeezed down narrow alleyways to reach office. Buildings. Companies depended on them for documents that needed to move fast. Couriers memorized shortcuts, back streets, and the quickest way to cross town at different times of day. As digital communication grew and delivery services expanded, the classic courier bikes became rare. As Canada changed, many of these jobs disappeared quietly. Some ended because new machines took over. Others faded as big stores closed or new roads were built. What remains are the stories, the sound of a whooshing message tube, the glow of a gas lamp in winter, the sparkle of a Christmas window, the steady beam of a lighthouse cutting through fog. These forgotten jobs remind us how much the country has changed and how many hands shaped daily life. If this journey brought back memories, share your favorite one in the comments below and help keep these stories alive.